Awesome. So I don't want to jump ahead of the topics too much, but I think that just transitions perfectly to talking about Prime Agent because
Yes.
yeah, it seems like such an because you mentioned like post training for that function calling loop and maybe OpenAI and Anthropic, they're sort of biased by that particular harness and that particular way of preparing the input data. But then the way this RLM presents the post training idea of like being trained to decompose tasks, I think it's yeah really captivating.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm happy to talk about Prime Agent. I so um, for those that don't know, Prime Agent is Prime Intellect's, which is a company. It's their new kind of agent harness that is centered around an RLM. So the main design of it is that the only tool in Prime Agent is this code REPL. It is this like IPython kind of persistent REPL. Um, and all the other tools and skills that you define inside of this agent in RLM fashion basically can be called inside of this code REPL. So if you add like a search tool or you add, let's say, some kind of like compaction tool or whatever, the model can call it directly inside of the REPL, like as it's kind of writing up a program for this. And additionally, sub agents, sub RLM calls and sub LLM calls are also available by default inside of this REPL. Um, and so Prime Agent is the way I would. Oh, I should also clarify that I did help work on this too. And so Prime Agent is, I would say, like one of the first kind of real like kind of production-y harnesses that is based or centered around an RLM. And they had this very exciting results on Prime Agent, where on I guess the public eval set of ArcAGI 3, and also some like long context benchmarks and these like long horizon benchmarks. Like they show in the blog post that the performance of Prime Agent is very good compared to Cloud Code or Codex or Pi, and some other agents. And also like the token spend and all these things is also very reasonable. And generally this is because for RLM stuff, which I guess I didn't really mention, one of the benefits of RLMs is that you can describe certain actions like many different combinations of tool calls and logic, like all in code. And this is like a very compressed representation versus if the language model just invoked each call like one by one. And so this is where a lot of the token savings comes from, because the model is describing things directly in code. So Prime Agent works for all like open source models, and also like the closed source models as well. But Prime Intellect, I think, has somewhat hinted that they're also training like a custom RLM model that works very well inside of RLMs and Prime Agent. And yeah, I should also maybe mention that another important part of Prime Agent is this continual harness thing, which is Seth. He's like another PhD student who's interning at Prime Intellect. He had integrated some features which are relevant for Prime Agent being able to run on games. So there's a lot of settings where Prime Agent uses RLM and continual harness to work very well on long horizon stuff. So you should check out. They've done a lot of I think like other kind of talks and stuff about it. And it's like super cool. I love using it. I use it alongside like the other coding harnesses as well. I think it's particularly useful for long horizon stuff. I will say like there probably is quite a bit of work to be done on the harness for other things, but long horizon work it is actually very good. So yeah, yeah. I hope I don't want this to be like a sales pitch or anything. It's yeah, but I do think it's an interesting harness, and it quite heavily leans on RLM, so it's very interesting regardless to look at and examine.
Yeah, super cool. Yeah, mentioning games that you have a super interesting background with that. I read your article in the Scientific American that you sold. Yeah.
Yes, yes. I'm a big I will say my dream is once I exhaust my laundry list of problems in AI, I think are like obvious and should be solved immediately, I will likely return to thinking about applying AI for games, which has been a passion of mine since I was very young. And there are some problems that I spent a long time in my undergrad trying to solve, that I was not able to solve. And so no one is able to solve them yet either. So I will probably return to these problems at some point. But yeah, something
I,
I'm also happy to talk about as well.
well, I think it has an interesting connection with your insights in this code execution because, like, I always tell people, like, yeah, I went to a Java camp when I was like 13. That's how I got into computer science. But it wasn't until I was building the RuneScape bot that I really said, now it's time to really learn Java
Yeah.
and things like like emulators and all these kinds of concepts. I think really transition nicely. But sorry, so I did get a little off topic because I did want to talk a little bit like with Prime Agent and just understanding I guess just right out of the gate when you were doing RL on weights with RLMs, like you had the Quen 3 fine tuned directly with weights. I'm curious, like with the DSPy background, also if you also tried like prompt tuning it, and then like
Mm.
how you then were like, I'm going to update the weights and like that kind of story of doing that.
Yeah. 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 So we did do a little bit of prompt tuning. I think especially on the initial prompt for the RLM. One thing I will say is that the issue with RLM stuff, or there's two parts. I think the issue in general with starting from Kodact, which is this paper around doing like back in 2024, they basically proposed an alternative to React, which is the same idea. It's like it's still a loop, but you have code as like you have everything as tools in code. Like actually, this was like a one of the earlier ideas that's very much related to RLMs, and they basically just never took off. Like some people might argue with me on this. I think React was just very obviously the dominant kind of paradigm for all agents, and this is very clear with like even the way we ended up doing tools for the past few years. Like this is a result of React being very popular, and I think both like the fact that most people actually don't know what Kodact is, and the fact that like everybody knows what React is. I think it's this was all like kind of how this worked. And so what happened was that the language models we trained around these harnesses were mostly trained around React, and the issue with this is that like when you want to use an RLM or a Kodact agent, um, as a human, I think we often think that like, well, if the model can do everything in React, then obviously it's smart enough to do everything in Kodact. But this is like anthropomorphizing models. I think like ultimately everything is about what you train on and the data you train on. And so this is like obviously not true. And so like when the reason we did this training experiment is less so because we don't believe that prompt optimization will get you very far, because it probably will. And I think with RLM stuff, like you have to describe what an RLM is to the model. This might not be as true anymore with some of the frontier models. Like I think they know what an RLM is. But at least like, in the past, it was definitely the case that like it doesn't know what an RLM is. So you have to describe everything to it. And this ends up like being somewhat of a limiting factor. And I think ultimately in the future, we are going to have to train like trajectories of RLMs on these models. So this is why we have this initial experiment with RL on the weights.
Yeah, and I think just that training on trajectories of RLMs, just that is such a powerful idea. And yeah, do you know what RLMs are? Yes. Do you realize that you yourself are an RLM? But yeah, and then I guess also like I remember Anthropic. I think it was even with the release of Fable, they were saying that they're doing this kind of RLM training, and I don't want to admit on the podcast I don't
Oh
use it
yeah,
as much as I should, but the super plug, the idea that it does the branching and just understanding exactly, yeah, I guess like yeah. So yeah, I'm sorry if this question